My name is Tori Thatcher, and I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and said 7 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Don't come home this year. Victoria doesn't want drama. No explanation, no apology. Just a door slammed shut on 27 years of trying to belong. That Thanksgiving, I sat alone at a restaurant in Boston, watching families laugh over turkey and cranberry sauce, while mine erased me with a single phone call. I had no idea the strangers at the next table would become the family I had always prayed for. And I definitely had no idea that 5 years later, at my wedding, they would be introduced as the parents of the bride, while my biological parents stood in the back of the room, uninvited, realizing they had been replaced in every way that actually matters. Before I tell you what happened, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if the story resonates with you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now, let me take you back to the phone call that changed everything. I remember exactly where I was standing when my phone rang. November 21st, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was in my tiny studio apartment in Boston, the kind of apartment where your bed is 3 steps from your stove and your dining table is also your desk. My suitcase lay open on the bed, half packed. Chunky sweaters folded neatly, a pair of boots tucked into the corner, a bottle of red wine wrapped carefully in a scarf so it wouldn't break in transit. I had even lit a pumpkin spice candle, overpriced, unnecessary, but comforting. I wanted the apartment to feel festive, warm, like I was going home. My phone buzzed on the counter. Mom! I smiled automatically when I saw her name. Hey, I was just finishing up packing. Tori. Her voice stopped me. It wasn't warm. It wasn't excited. It was flat. I need to tell you something. A small knot formed in my stomach. What's wrong? Is Dad okay? He's fine. A pause. The kind of pause that rearranges your heartbeat. Don't come home this year. Victoria doesn't want drama. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. I laughed, a short, confused sound. What? Victoria doesn't need stress right now. Stress? The word echoed in my apartment like it didn't belong there. I haven't even talked to her in months, I said slowly. That's exactly the point, my mother replied. Let's keep it that way. The air felt thinner. I already bought my plane ticket. Just cancel it. Just like that. 27 years of family, reduced to airline logistics. I swallowed. Why am I drama? A sigh on the other end, the familiar one, the tired of you sigh. You always make everything about you, Tori. My chest tightened. All I had done the last time I saw my sister was ask why I wasn't invited to her baby shower. Apparently, that qualified as making it about me. She's pregnant again, my mom continued. We're trying to keep things peaceful. Peaceful? Peace apparently meant my absence. So I'm not welcome. It's just for this year, she said, already impatient. Don't overreact. I stared at the snow starting to fall outside my window. Soft flakes drifting past the fire escape like nothing was breaking inside me. I thought Thanksgiving was about family. It is. Exactly. And then she hung up. No, I love you. No, we'll figure something out. Just silence. I stood there for a long time, phone still in my hand, listening to the faint crackle of the candle. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, colder. I wasn't surprised. That's the worst part. This wasn't new. Victoria had always been the golden child. If she cried, everyone rushed to comfort her. If I cried, I was too sensitive. If she made mistakes, she was overwhelmed. If I questioned anything, I was dramatic. My 16th birthday dinner was canceled because Victoria had a bad week at school. My college graduation, my parents missed half of it because Victoria needed support after an argument with her boyfriend. Family photos were carefully curated, smiles bright, arms linked, but I was always slightly off to the side, close enough to look included, far enough to be removable. And apparently, removable was exactly what they needed this year. I tried calling my dad. Maybe he'd say something different. "Hey, kiddo." The TV was playing in the background. "Dad, did Mom tell you?" A pause. "Yeah. And you're okay with this?" Another pause. Longer this time. "You know how your mother is. She's just trying to keep things calm." By uninviting me? It's just one holiday. But it wasn't. It was confirmation. I wasn't equal. I was optional. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the half-packed suitcase. I could still go, show up anyway, force my way into the picture. But I already knew how that would go. Tension, whispers, Victoria's tight smile, my mother's sharp looks across the table, and later the inevitable lecture about ruining everything. So I unpacked. Sweaters back into drawers, boots back into the closet, wine back on the counter. 3 days later, instead of boarding a plane home, I walked alone through the cold Boston air towards a restaurant called Harbor View Grill. Families filled every table, grandparents hugging grandchildren, parents carving turkey, laughter rising like music. I told the hostess, "Just one." She gave me that look, the sympathetic one, and led me to a small table near the window. I ordered turkey. I didn't taste it. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was independent, strong, better off. But when the family at the table next to me bowed their heads to say grace, something inside me cracked. Because I had spent 27 years trying to earn a seat at a table that didn't want me. And I didn't know it yet, but the strangers sitting beside me were about to notice I was alone, and everything was about to change. I was halfway through my cold turkey dinner when I realized I couldn't hear my own thoughts anymore. The restaurant was loud, not chaotic loud, but warm loud, the kind of loud that comes from belonging. Forks clinking against plates, glasses tapping, children asking for more mashed potatoes, someone laughing too hard at a dad joke. And then there was me, table for one, trying not to cry into stuffing. I kept my eyes on my plate, pretending to scroll through my phone so no one would mistake the shine in my eyes for loneliness. That's when I heard a gentle voice beside me. "Sweetheart, are you alone?" I looked up. A woman in her early 60s stood beside my table. Silver hair pulled back neatly, soft blue sweater, kind eyes, the kind that notice things. "Oh," I said quickly, forcing a polite smile. "Yeah, just treating myself." She tilted her head slightly, not in pity, in assessment. "Well," she said warmly, "no one should eat Thanksgiving dinner alone. We have an extra chair." I glanced at the table behind her. There were 4 of them, a man about her age, a younger man, early 30s maybe, and a teenage girl scrolling on her phone. They looked normal, comfortable, easy with one another. "I don't want to intrude," I said automatically. "You wouldn't be," she replied. "I'm Eleanor, that's my husband Richard, and our son Marcus. Please." Something inside me hesitated, but something else, something tired of pretending I was fine, said yes. 5 minutes later, I was carrying my plate to their table, and that's how I met the family that would eventually change my name. Conversations started simple. "Do you have family in the area?" Richard asked kindly. I swallowed. "Not exactly." That was all I said at first. I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to overshare. I had been trained my whole life to minimize my hurt so other people wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But Eleanor had a way of asking questions that made silence feel safe instead of awkward. "What brought you here tonight?" she asked gently. And before I could stop myself, the truth slipped out. My mom told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. The table went quiet. Not shocked, not judgmental, just present. She said my sister didn't want drama. Marcus's eyebrows lifted slightly. Drama? I asked last year why I wasn't invited to her baby shower, I said with a small shrug. Apparently, that was enough. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to defend my family. She didn't say the usual things people say. Instead, she asked, "Has this happened before?" And that question cracked something open. I told them about my 16th birthday being canceled because my sister was having a hard time. I told them about my parents missing half my college graduation. I told them about how every time I expressed hurt, I was told I was too sensitive. I told them about always being second, always optional. When I finished, I immediately felt embarrassed. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I don't usually unload like that." Eleanor reached across the table and touched my hand lightly. "You didn't unload," she said softly. "You answered a question." No one had ever said that to me before. Marcus leaned back in his chair and studying me in a way that didn't feel invasive, just curious. "Have they always called you dramatic?" he asked. "Pretty much." He shook his head slightly. "That's interesting. Why?" "Because you don't seem dramatic." I let out a small laugh. "You've known me for 20 minutes. Still," he said, "you seem reasonable." Reasonable. The word hit me harder than it should have. Eleanor folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. "Sometimes," she said thoughtfully, "the person labeled as the problem in a family is simply the one who notices the problem." I blinked. No one had ever framed it that way. All my life, I had assumed I was flawed, too emotional, too reactive, too much. What if I wasn't too much? What if I was just aware? We ended up staying at that restaurant for nearly 3 hours. Dessert came and went. Coffee was poured. By the time the check arrived, I felt something I hadn't in years. Seen. As we stood to leave, Eleanor hesitated. "We host Sunday dinners most weeks. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. You're welcome to join." I instinctively wanted to decline. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I didn't want to assume I was wanted. "That's very kind," I said carefully. "It's an invitation, not charity." Marcus smiled slightly. "And I make a decent lasagna." I surprised myself. "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers. As I walked back to my apartment that night, the cold didn't feel as sharp. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Marcus, glad you didn't eat alone after all." I smiled at my screen. What I didn't know yet was that those Sunday dinners would become routine. That routine would become attachment, and attachment would become something permanent. Because 2 years later, Eleanor would sit across from me at her kitchen table and say something that would change my life just as much as my mother's phone call had. "There are legal ways," she said carefully, "to make chosen family official." And for the first time, the idea of belonging didn't feel like something I had to earn. It felt like something being offered. Freely. Sunday dinners turned into a rhythm. Lasagna and red wine, board games, long conversations about politics, books, and childhood stories that didn't leave anyone feeling small. I didn't realize how starved I had been for ordinary kindness until I started receiving it regularly. The Morrisons never treated me like a guest. They treated me like I had always been there. Eleanor would hand me a dish towel without asking. Richard would save me the corner piece of cornbread because he remembered I liked the crispy edge. Marcus would text me midweek just to ask how my day was, and actually wait for the answer. 2 years later, Marcus proposed at Harborview Grill. Same table, same window, same view of the harbor. But this time, I wasn't alone. When I said yes, Eleanor cried harder than I did. And somewhere between choosing venues and tasting cake samples, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and peaceful. I wasn't going to invite my biological parents. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but because peace had finally entered my life, and I wasn't going to reintroduce chaos in the name of tradition. For 3 years, they hadn't called. Not on birthdays, not on holidays, not even when I changed jobs. Silence can say a lot. Apparently, engagement announcements say more. I posted one photo. Marcus on one knee, me crying, the caption, "Forever starts now." My phone started buzzing within minutes. First, a text from Victoria. "Wow, didn't know you were seeing someone that seriously." As if she'd been checking. Then another. "Are mom and dad invited?" No congratulations, no happiness, just logistics. I didn't respond. An hour later, my mother called. I stared at her name on the screen for a long time before answering. "Tori," she said, voice tight, "why did I find out about your engagement on Facebook?" "Because you haven't called me in 3 years," I wanted to say. "I didn't think you'd be interested." A sharp inhale. "Of course we're interested. We're your parents." The word felt strange. Parents? "Are we invited?" she asked directly. I took a breath. "No." Silence. Then laughter. "Oh, don't be ridiculous." "I'm not." Her tone shifted instantly, harder, colder. "You're still upset about Thanksgiving? That was 5 years ago." "It wasn't just Thanksgiving. You always exaggerate." There it was again. The script never changed. Victoria was pregnant. We were protecting her peace. "And what about mine?" I asked quietly. "You're making this dramatic." The irony almost made me smile. For years, I had swallowed my feelings to avoid being labeled difficult. Now I was calm, clear, direct. And somehow that was still drama. "We're not coming," I repeated. She hung up on me. The next week, my father called, not to apologize, to negotiate. He said carefully, "We don't want things to be awkward." I replied, "They won't be. You're not invited." A long pause. "You can't just erase us." The words echoed. Erase. Like they hadn't done exactly that to me first. But what unsettled me wasn't the anger. It was the entitlement, as if access to my life was automatic, guaranteed, permanent. Wedding planning continued. I hired security, not because I expected violence, but because I knew my mother well enough to predict a scene. The gaslighting escalated. Extended relatives started messaging me. "Family is forever. You'll regret this. Your parents did their best." Did they? Or did they do what was easiest? Victoria sent a final text 2 weeks before the wedding. "You're embarrassing us. People are asking questions." There it was. Not hurt, not reconciliation, reputation. I didn't respond. The morning of the wedding, I felt surprisingly calm. Makeup artists moved around me. Bridesmaids laughed. Eleanor held my hand while the stylist pinned my veil. "You're sure?" she asked softly. Yes. This wasn't about punishment. It was about protection, about choosing the environment where love felt steady, not conditional. An hour before the ceremony, there was a knock at the bridal suite door. One of the venue coordinators stepped inside, looking uneasy. "There are 2 people here asking to come in. They claim to be your parents." My stomach didn't drop. It didn't twist. It didn't ache. It settled. Of course they came. They had never respected boundaries before. Why would today be different? "What would you like us to do?" she asked carefully. I stood slowly, smoothed my dress, adjusted my veil, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the little girl trying to earn her seat at the table. "Let them in," I said calmly. Not to reconcile, not to forgive, but to witness what they had lost. Because this time, I wasn't the one standing outside the door. They arrived 10 minutes before the ceremony. I watched through the small window of the bridal suite as my biological parents stepped into the vineyard courtyard like they belonged there. My mother wore navy silk. My father wore the same gray suit he'd worn to Victoria's baby shower, the one I hadn't been invited to. They looked confident, expectant, like this was a misunderstanding that would correct itself the moment I saw them. Eleanor squeezed my hand gently. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes," I said calmly, "I do. Not for them, for me." I wasn't letting them in to reconcile. I was letting them in to witness. The ceremony was beautiful. Marcus's voice shook when he said his vows. Mine didn't. I felt steady, grounded in something I had built myself. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, applause rose like a wave across the vineyard. And in the back row, I saw my mother clapping too loudly. Performing. Always performing. The reception began at sunset. Golden light spilled through the barn windows. Music floated softly across candlelit tables. I knew the moment was coming. The introductions. I stood at the sweetheart table as the DJ lifted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the parents of the bride." I saw my biological mother straighten instantly. Her hand found my father's arm. This was her moment. Public validation. Proof that no matter what had happened, she was still the mother. The DJ continued. "Richard and Eleanor Morrison." The room erupted. Every guest stood. Cheers, whistles, applause. At the front table, Richard rose slowly, dignified as ever. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, overwhelmed, before smiling through tears. They walked to the center of the dance floor. And my biological parents didn't move. At first, confusion flickered across my mother's face, then disbelief, then something sharper. I watched it happen in real time. The realization. I wasn't Tori Thatcher anymore. 2 years before the wedding, 6 months after Marcus proposed, I had sat at Eleanor's kitchen table while she spoke gently but directly. "There are legal ways," she had said, "to make chosen family official, but only if it's what you truly want." Adult adoption. I had researched it for weeks before bringing it up again. It wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about acknowledging reality. Who showed up, who called, who cared. The paperwork took months. Court dates, signatures, a quiet hearing where a judge asked me one simple question. "Are you choosing this freely?" "Yes," I had answered without hesitation. And just like that, my name changed. New birth certificate, new legal parents. Permanent. I hadn't announced it publicly. I hadn't made a dramatic post, because this wasn't revenge. It was alignment. Now, standing at my wedding reception, watching the applause surround Richard and Eleanor, I felt something I had never felt growing up. Security, belonging, certainty. Across the room, my biological mother's face had gone pale. She turned to my father, whispering urgently. He looked stunned, as if the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. But the ground hadn't shifted. It had been moving for years. They just hadn't noticed. After the applause faded, Richard lifted the microphone. He wasn't a flashy speaker. He didn't need to be. "When Tori came into our lives," he began, voice steady, "we didn't realize how much we needed her." Soft laughter rippled through the room. "She says we chose her, but the truth is, she chose us too." Eleanor wiped her eyes. She showed up at our table on a Thanksgiving when she thought she was alone, but she never has been since. The room was silent now, listening, feeling. I saw guests glance subtly toward the back of the hall, toward my biological parents standing rigid near the exit. And then something unexpected happened. My father stepped forward, not dramatically, not loudly, just forward. He approached the edge of the dance floor. My mother grabbed his sleeve, whispering something urgently, but he gently pulled free. For the first time in my life, he didn't follow her lead. He looked at me, really looked at me. And in his expression, I didn't see anger. I saw regret. He didn't speak yet, but the apology was already forming in his eyes. And for a split second, the room held its breath. Because this wasn't just a wedding anymore, it was a reckoning. And for the first time, the power wasn't theirs. It was mine. The music shifted to our first dance song, soft and slow, as Marcus led me onto the floor. I rested my head lightly on his shoulder, feeling the warmth and steady rhythm of someone who had never once doubted me. Around us, guests swayed and whispered, but my attention was fixed on the back of the room. My biological parents had taken a seat near the exit, their faces masks of disbelief, envy, and perhaps the first flicker of shame I had ever seen. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their presence to validate the years of loneliness, of trying to belong, of learning to trust myself when everyone else had dismissed me. What I needed, and finally had, was a family who chose me freely. A family who had seen me at my lowest, who had lifted me without judgment, who had made me feel that being me was more than enough. After the dance, Eleanor and Richard came over, their smiles radiant. "You did this beautifully," Eleanor whispered. "You've taken everything they tried to deny you and built something real." I nodded, tears threatening to spill, but this time they were not the desperate, aching tears of a girl left behind. They were the tears of someone who had survived, someone who had chosen her own path and thrived. I made my way to the edge of the dance floor and finally faced my biological parents. My mother's eyes were wide, lips trembling. My father's expression was tighter, harder, yet I could see the weight of realization pressing down on him. They opened their mouths to speak, but I raised a hand gently. "You don't get to say anything," I said softly, yet firmly. "Not here, not now. The past doesn't change, but neither does what I've built." For the first time in decades, I felt unshackled from their expectations, their cruelty, their constant reminders that I was never enough. Marcus squeezed my hand, grounding me, and I realized something profound. I had replaced what was missing, not with revenge or bitterness, but with love, loyalty, and choice. My family, the real one, stood smiling around us, celebrating not just a wedding, but a triumph over years of neglect and heartbreak. Later, as the night wound down, I found a quiet corner and took a deep breath. The vineyard glowed under the moonlight, golden light flickering against the barn walls. I thought of that lonely Thanksgiving in Boston, of the cold turkey dinner and strangers who became everything I had longed for. How strange, I thought, that life could bring people into your story at exactly the right moment, transforming despair into joy. And my biological parents? They slipped out quietly, avoiding the goodbye hugs, avoiding the congratulations. They weren't angry. They were invisible, erased by the choice I had made years ago. They had watched their daughter celebrate life without them, and the truth was undeniable. Their absence had been replaced by love far richer than anything they could provide. By the end of the night, as Marcus and I stood beneath the twinkling fairy lights for the final photograph, I felt complete. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it had transformed into clarity. I knew now that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about presence, support, and unwavering choice. I had found my family in Eleanor and Richard, in Marcus, in friends who had stood beside me, and in the unwavering knowledge that I deserved love without conditions. I looked up at the stars above the vineyard, silent witnesses to my journey, and whispered a quiet promise to myself. No more waiting for someone else to define my worth. I had done it. I had claimed my life, my love, my family. And for the first time, I felt entirely free. That night, as the lights dimmed and the last guests departed, I finally understood the true meaning of belonging. Not the hollow promises of those who never cared, but the unshakable presence of those who had chosen me, every day, without question. And that was more than enough.